cavalry, they send me off to war. I want a good steed under me like my forefathers before.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Lieutenant Atterbury back at it again with another podcast. Today, we have our awesome Sergeant Stanger here with us. Sergeant Stanger has been with the program for how many years?
4 years now.
4 years. That's pretty awesome. So glad to have you on the podcast.
Glad to be here.
But we'll start it off. We're always interested in where people come from. Can you tell us a little bit about what's your origin story? How'd you come here? Did you live in New Mexico?
My story's a little bit different. I was actually born in Daegu, South Korea. So this was during the 80s, not to age myself. But like in the 80s, South Korea was still kind of in a rebuild phase, still from the Korean War. So the poverty level was a lot higher back then. So in the early 80s, a lot of Korean children ended up in orphanages, and I was one of them. So I stayed in an orphanage till I was about 4 and a half when I was adopted by my family. And they actually lived in Colorado Springs at the time. So I came to the States about right before I turned 5 and spent like my earlier years in like the Colorado Springs area. And then we came down to New Mexico my freshman year of high school. And I finished out high school here before going off to college and everything else. So being here at UNM is kind of like almost like a reunion for me coming back to the state. So it's been nice.
So what were your parents were in the military? You said they were
No,
living in Colorado Springs.
no. So my parents weren't affiliated with the military.
Okay.
My family never really had a legacy of service. Like my grandpa was, of course. But he was drafted like towards the end of World War II. Outside of him and an uncle, really, military service wasn't huge in our family. They just happened to live in Colorado Springs because that's where my mom grew up, is in the Colorado Springs, Denver area. So that's how we ended up there. It wasn't like really military affiliated.
So how'd you come down to New Mexico?
Dad was working for a janitorial supply company, like selling clean chemicals, and his company transferred him here to New Mexico. That had to be like, what, 97-ish, 98-ish when we came down here. And just ended up going to high school here. And then my parents ended up retiring here too. So they're still here in the state of New Mexico.
Nice.
It's kind of nice for me to be around them, see them on a regular basis, stuff like that.
Now, how'd you join the military? Was it here that you started, finding the recruiters, or was it somewhere?
So mine was a different. After high school, went to University of Maryland, go Terrapins. But then after college was over, I kind of found my first job. The military really wasn't on my mind at that time because, like I said, our family wasn't big on service. So I worked for a company called MCI. It was a telecommunications company. This was back when they sold long distance plans. That's how old it was. And right about the time that I started there is when everyone was really making the switch from like landlines to cell phones. Because cell phones they've been around for a while, but in 2006, they still weren't like what they are today, where everyone has a cell phone. So MCI got bought out by Verizon in 2006. So the second I kind of got into the real world workforce, I lost my job afterwards because, hey, we're not doing landlines anymore. Go find something else to do. So at the time, it was the height of kind of like the surge, like they really started the surge in Iraq. And I didn't know what else to do at that time. So I walked into originally a Navy recruiter's office because I thought being on a submarine would be awesome. I didn't really know a lot about the military, like how it was broken down between officer and enlisted. So I just went to a recruiter's office because that's the easiest thing to kind of research. So I went to the Navy's office, did all my testing, and they said, hey, do you want to be on a submarine like you wanted? We can get you that spot. I was like, oh, definitely. Like, I 100% want to do this. Like, well, the training pipeline, it's going to be like almost a year before you can even leave the training because it was such a specialized field that they couldn't get you out right away. I was like, let me think about that. I was like, that's a long time to kind of have to find something else to do before I left for military training. So I walked outside, and of course, the Army recruiter, just like back in the day, was kind of standing outside and stopped me. He's like, hey, what are you doing in the Navy office? I was like, just kind of looking at my options. He's like, have you ever thought about the Army? I was like, not really. I was like, yeah, I know it's a thing, but didn't know too much about it. So I went and talked to him, and he showed me this amazing video of what they call a Cap Scout 19 Delta. And it was these guys in ghillie suits. They're coming out of the back of Chinooks on like 4-wheelers and dirt bikes and doing stuff like that. I was like, oh man, that seems like an awesome job. I was like, I'll 100% do that. So from the time I met the recruiter to the time I actually went to basic training was a little bit less than 30 days, actually. It was such a whirlwind process for me. By the time I got to Fort Knox, I was like, man, I don't even know what happened, how I ended up here. Almost 20 years later, like, I don't regret the choice, though. Like, it's been a good 20 years.
Oh, that's a huge shift, though. I mean, it is really cool. Like, you had your interest in the subs, but, the whole training pipeline.
Yeah.
That's really awesome that the Cap Scouts do all those things. What was basic training like that for you?
Basic training was weird. So for me, not really having a military background, I never even touched a gun up to this point. I've done anything like super, I would say super physical. Like I did play sports growing up, grew up playing hockey in Colorado, played baseball in New Mexico, but I don't think either of those really prepare you for what like basic training's like. It was such a sensory overload almost. There's people yelling. You're with a platoon of 60 other guys that I have no clue where they're from. I remember my bunkmate was this guy from Montana, and that was the first time I ever met anyone from Montana. Kind of an odd kind of cowboy kind of kid. And those were kids that I didn't grow up with. That training pipeline and just being at Fort Knox.
So you said Fort Knox, so for cavalry, is that basically an armor sort of pathway, and that's why it was at Fort Knox?
So back in the day, before the Maneuver Center of Excellence down at Fort Benning, the Army kind of separate things by MOS and branch. Fort Knox is home of armor. So you had your CAV scouts, your 19 kilos, your tankers, and everything else out there. There were companies of like support guys who were going through basic training and they'd go off to different AITs. But Fort Knox at the time was the home of the armor branch for the Army. And then I think it was mid-2000s when they kind of shifted away and moved everything to Fort Benning, because the war in Iraq kind of taught everyone that the Maneuver Center of Excellence, that everything was so interconnected. Why not have them in the same area for their initial training to kind of get that joint capability mindset put together? And what the Army was for that.
When was it like finalized, the Maneuver Center or these centers of excellence?
I'm trying to remember. I can't be 100% accurate. I think it was around the 2007, 2008 timeline. So when they really started making that switch of slowly transitioning from Fort Knox and moving everything down to Fort Benning. I was towards the end of that, before they made the final switch. I was probably one of the last classes to go through Fort Knox. But the cool thing is now with our cadets, when they go to their summer training, the barracks that they stay in are the same barracks I went to basic training in. So there's that kind of weird connection for them, when they go to their advanced training, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, definitely.
I get to see they do the same obstacle course. They do the same land nav course. The ruck marches, they do the same ruck marches I did in basic training. So it's kind of a cool connection to kind of see my career go full swing. I started off there, and now I'm seeing the kids I'm helping to train go back there and train themselves, which is kind of cool.
Definitely. From basic training, where'd you go from there?
My first duty station was Fort Cavazos. It used to be called Fort Hood at the time. Fort Cavazos, when I got there, was home to 4th ID and 1st CAV. So you had two huge divisions there. At the time, it was the technically largest Army base when it came to like military personnel. Just because they had two divisions, and then you had the 3rd Corps headquarters. So when I got there, it was about like the beginning of 2007. They stood up what they call the Fires Brigade. This was a new concept kind of, I think, for the Army, where it was all the artillery assets into one area. Since it was such a new unit and they were getting ready to deploy within a 12-month time frame, they threw a hodgepodge of different MOSs into this unit. So instead of going straight to an armor unit, like most CAV scouts would go to like a scout platoon, I ended up going to a field artillery unit, to the 47th Fires Brigade within the, over there, or 41st Fires Brigade, as they called it at the time. And it was a mixture of everybody. So we had infantry personnel, we had field artillery personnel, CAV scouts, mechanics. We were all just kind of lumped together for that first deployment to get the unit off the ground. When I got there, I believe a major was actually the brigade commander at the time, because they still hadn't found a colonel. The company commander was a first lieutenant, because they were still trying to pull personnel in to form this.
You're still working as a CAV scout, like going in front of the front line and basically laying delay lines and things like that? Or
so first, when they first stood up, it was MLRSs, which was an interesting thing at the time, because we were getting ready our first deployment was to Baghdad, and MLRSs really can't operate so much in Baghdad just because of the amount of damage that they can actually cause. So what ended up happening is we ended up getting almost like a security platoon at that point. So between the infantrymen, the CAV scouts, field artillery, they used us more as security forces at that point. We did checkpoints throughout the city. Half the unit was guarding the green zone where the embassies all were. So they were still kind of figuring out our role. And actual field artillery guys, the MLRSs, were on the outskirts of Baghdad standing by, but they didn't get to do as much just because of the type of weaponry they had. So it was definitely an interesting learning experience. That wasn't what I was expecting it to be right off the bat, I think.
And what was because you said there's like a hodgepodge of different MOSs in this one unit. What was the culture like as far as you're in that new unit? Are you expected to learn from what I've seen, the cherry sheet, going through a sheet of tests, you're always sort of like going through. Or what was it like?
It was definitely almost like carry sheet. They gave us a list of tasks that they wanted you to train up on before deployment. But I think for us, with everyone being so brand new and being from different backgrounds and different MOSs, ours was kind of a weird lesson on how to adapt and change to the Army, kind of work as a team. So we got a different teamwork aspect. I'll guarantee we didn't complete every task on that list. I think the most important part for us as young soldiers, because I was a E1 at the time, was just trying to figure out how to operate within a small team unit, kind of go from there for us.
Do you remember about your squad leaders or your platoon sergeant and your PL back then?
I think for me, the thing I remember most is my squad leader. He was an infantry guy, came from 82nd. His name was Staff Sergeant McBean. I just remember because he used to always walk around like he'd suck on his teeth like the whole time when he was talking to you. But his was a squad, like there was a couple CAV scouts, a couple infantry guys in his squad. So I think for him, I just remember him being such a big figure for all of us at the time. We were all young. At this point, he's been in the Army for like 6-7 years, been on deployments. So for us, he was like a bigger than life character, almost like cartoon like to me, just in like his mannerisms and the way he talked to people. As far as our platoon leader at the time, like I was the same age as our platoon leader. He was coming straight out of college. He was a West Point grad. He was an infantry officer. And I think it's kind of interesting to see how a brand new private at a unit and a brand new lieutenant at the unit are kind of going through the same hurdles. They're trying to figure out their place, how they operate within a system, and really what their left and right limits are. So I think for all of us, between the squad leaders and the platoon sergeant, they were our biggest guiding factors on how we trained and what we trained on at the time.
You've been through your first deployment. What happened after that?
So when we got back from Fort Hood, that's when I got my first PCS assignment. And I got super lucky. I got to go to 25th ID, be part of the 25th ID, Tropic Lightning, get to go live in Hawaii for a few years. And I was like super excited. So I did my first PCS there. I got to Hawaii when the unit was deployed, actually. So I ended up on the rear D for like the first couple months because they were on their way back. But that was my first chance, that unit, to really be in a cavalry environment, because I was with 3rd Squadron, 4th U.S. Cavalry, which was a part of 3rd Brigade, which was nice for me to go from kind of a hodgepodge mix of people to a straight actual cavalry unit, and then get to see how that operates and get to live that lifestyle for me. So that was kind of the transition back from Iraq, was to go to there first, which was nice.
Hey, what was that experience like? Because that's kind of crazy.
So it is different, especially being a young soldier. No one really tells you what to expect. I just remember I got my orders. Luckily at that point, I'm living in the barracks. You don't have a lot of stuff to take with you. You pack up your bags. The military ships all your household goods, which is at the time, I think I was like 23, 24. I had like a PlayStation, computers, personal stuff and stuff like that. So it wasn't like a huge move like it would be nowadays, like for like if you were married, had a house. So that transition over there was pretty easy for me. Getting to a unit when they're deployed and being on rear D is definitely an interesting thing because there's so few people there. But I think our real mission for the rear detachment was when I first got there was really getting ready to receive the guys coming back from their deployment. So a lot of our time was spent getting rid of the motor pool, ready to receive all the vehicles coming back, receive all their gear and stuff like that. But as far as the move went, it was super smooth. And I got some downtime right at the beginning since they were still deployed to kind of really explore Hawaii and just get to go do all the fun things at that point.
And what was it like living in Hawaii? Being a soldier, is the living conditions pretty nice?
The buildings tend to be older. A lot of them are historical. So the outsides of the building doesn't change because during World War II, when Pearl Harbor happened, a lot of the structures on Schofield too were also strafed at the time because they had what they call Wheeler Army Airfield, which is part of Schofield. So the buildings had like strafe marks from when the Japanese were strafing the island and stuff like that. So the outside of the building is super historical. The inside of the rooms, of course, were all renovated at the time, brand new. So the quality of life was honestly a lot better than what it was at Cavazos. A lot of those buildings were older. It was such a large base. They had limited funds to kind of redo things. Hawaii being a little bit on the smaller side, they had a lot more funds to kind of redo the barracks, and stuff like that. But as far as being on the island, a lot of people always said, oh, I get island fever. It's so expensive to do all these things. What I learned early on is the beach is free. I remember after work, you and your buddies, you'd go catch like a cab down to the beach. You just take a little grill with you. You play football, go swim, drink some beers. And honestly, like I fell in love with like surfing down there, learned how to surf. I got scuba certified while I was in Hawaii. So it was a great time if you really love outdoor, like spending time outdoors at that point.
And what was it like receiving your unit? How many months before that they returned? And were they deployed to the Middle East or were they in like the South Pacific somewhere?
So for them at the time, they were coming back from Iraq too. Because the mid 2000s, um, with 25th ID technically having the Indochina area, everyone was still focused on the Middle East because this is the height of Iraq, the height of Afghanistan. So it was almost in every other year you're going to either one of the two at the time. So I was there for about almost 4 months before they got back. But receiving them was like honestly interesting because at that point I'd been deployed. A lot of, like everyone coming back is coming back from their first deployment, a lot of the younger soldiers. So the transition, trying to find new friends and meet new people wasn't as hard as it normally would have been at that point. Because I always say this about the Army. The good thing about the Army is even while you move every few years, your friend group almost stays the same. Because you're going to find someone with those same personality traits that your friends were at their first duty station at your next duty station. You'll always find a guy who's just a constant joker. You'll find a super serious guy or whoever it is that you fit in with. You'll find people generally like that at each unit. Which makes it easier to move every few years within the Army. And so them coming back to transition honestly wasn't that hard to fit in, to find out where you fit in. It may have taken a little bit longer than normal just because those guys have spent the last year together and you're the new guy. So it's just trying to find your place within the platoon maybe took a little bit longer than normal, but it was still a smooth transition kind of going into that new platoon at the time.
All right. And then what are you in any different positions now, or have you been promoted?
So at this point, I was a young specialist at the time. When they got back, a lot of people were getting ready to move into that PCS season. So I was made a corporal and became a team leader at the time, just because everyone else PCS. So that was my first real chance at like leadership positions, being a team leader. That's literally like the kind of like the smallest group that you ever really lead as an enlisted soldier, as a team leader. So I had 3 young privates under me that I was responsible for their training, well-being, and everything else. And it was honestly, it was a great learning experience before you become a squad leader. It gives you that first little taste of how am I going to be as a leader? How am I going to function? How am I going to manage day-to-day activities? So it was a great learning experience for me as a young corporal at that time.
Did you have to go to any specialized basic leader? Isn't it called BLC?
Yeah, it's called
basic leadership course?
BLC now. When I went, it was called ULC. It was called Warriors Leaders Course.
Okay.
And I did that in Hawaii right before I got my, and that's the bare basics of leadership. That's where really, while the kids in ROTC, their whole 4 years is focused on it. On the enlisted side, our first couple years within the unit is really tactically based, like technical based. So BLC is our first chance at really developing our leadership style and learning how to function as a small group leader at that point. The school is about 30 days long. It's a living course. You stay in the barracks. You're still making your hospital bed corners. You're getting inspected every day on your uniform, DNC, and just general knowledge of the Army at that point. As far as school goes, I think it's a great start for enlisted soldiers at first BLC. Because at that point, most of them are still young in their early 20s, and it kind of gives them a foundation to build off of for future leadership schools and stuff like that.
What's it like working for the squad leader at the same time managing a team?
But the key takeaways, I think, as a young team leader, it's like drinking water from a fire hose. It's a lot coming at you at that time because the people that you're leading aren't much younger than you are at that point. You're trying to manage the expectations of your squad leader, your platoon sergeant, your platoon leader, while all at the same time trying to train, teach, and mentor your young soldiers while also accomplishing your daily tasks. So I think for me, I think the biggest takeaway was just learning how to manage time. Because no one really teaches people how to manage their time on a day-to-day basis. As a young team leader, that's your first real experience of how do I accomplish all these different tasks I was given with a limited, number of people, a limited number of resources. How do I manage all this throughout the day? So that was my biggest takeaway, I think, as a young team leader.
And how long were you a team leader before being a squad leader?
Almost a year and a half, because at that point they got back and everyone was on a cycle for deployment. So we had another year-long train up to get ready for another deployment. So actually almost 2 years, because we did the whole train up as a team leader, then we went on deployment as a team leader. And then when we got back, that's when I became a squad leader. So it was about a 2-year span that I really got to spend with my small group of guys. It really bonded. I still talk to them to this day, a lot of those guys. I officiated a couple of their weddings just because we spent so much time together within a 2-year span between deployment every single day together. And even before deployment, you had rotations on the big islands where you do 30-day FTXs. You come back, we got ready for MTC, which was another 30-day rotation. So it was a lot of training up just to get ready for deployment that you spent with these guys.
So you guys went to NTC from Hawaii?
Yes.
Really? So that's kind of insane to think, because yeah, there's the training that you can do on Hawaii. Is there a ton of training area? Or that's why you guys go to NTC?
There are some training areas, the biggest one being on the Big Island, but it's limited maneuverable areas there. The training area on the Big Island is mostly volcanic rock, so you can't really get out there and do small unit tactics. You can't really do platoon level maneuvers just because the terrain is so rough at that point. So most of the time when you go to like the Big Island for training, it's usually to do your gunnery for the month or for the year. So you do your gunnery there, and then go back. So when we go to NTC, that's your first chance to really operate within space, and it's part of a bigger kind of unit like at the time. So for us, it was a huge experience getting over there. Because for us, you had to load everything onto cargo ships to get to California, and then once you get to California, you had another crew waiting there that you send out early to get everything onto semis or onto the train to take to Fort Irwin. So as far as moving pieces go, it's probably one of the harder moves to get to a training area of any base really at that point.
Yeah, that sounds huge. So what was your piece in that? Were you at that, like, did you ever go forward, or were you always back?
So our biggest thing getting ready to go to NTC is what they call the beachhead. So you get all your vehicles getting ready to load onto boats. So you would take it down to a staging area where they would load them onto semis to take down to the port. And that was our biggest thing. You had to check for vehicle quality. Like vehicles couldn't be leaking. Gear had to be properly packed within connexes. So just to lead up to getting ready to go to NTC was probably a 2-month preparation phase of really just like long days, long nights, just getting ready, packing things up, double checking, triple checking all your gear and stuff like that. Because by the time that thing leaves, it leaves about a month before you even get to NTC. So everything you're gonna take, you have to have pre-planned, pre-staged, and then ready to move. So once you get to NTC, you don't really have a chance to wait on more equipment to arrive. You hit the ground, and then it's a couple of days of prep, and then it's right into that rotational piece of getting ready to do simulated combat at that point.
What are you using vehicle-wise? Are you in So as a CAV scout, do you guys have Humvees or Bradleys or Strikers?
So the ID, it's being a light infantry division at that point. We were in Humvees. The other brigade in Hawaii, because there's 4 brigades total, 2 were in Hawaii, 1 was in Washington, and 1 was in Alaska. So we were a light brigade. The 2nd brigade was a striker brigade, which was still a newer concept at the time. So they had the strikers. So we were straight Humvees, LMTVs at that point. Because everything we did was dismounted. So moving vehicles, it wasn't like as big of a deal as like the striker brigade would be. Because those vehicles are so much larger. For us, it was just all the light vehicles and equipment for us.
Okay. And then was this your second time at NTC? Or if you've been...
This is my first time.
Really? Okay.
When I was at Fort Hood, we didn't get to go to NTC because it was a brand new unit. We did the 30-day train up at Fort Hood, but we didn't do a rotation at NTC. So this was my first time going to NTC, and it's definitely as rough as people always think it is. So NTC is not a fun place to be. It's a brigade level exercise at that point. The whole brigade goes out there and you're trying to control a huge battle space at that point. As a CAV squadron, our biggest thing was at the time doing reconnaissance and like screening maneuvers for the rest of the brigade at that point. So as a young team leader, I remember we used to do a lot of OPs out there, just observation posts, trying to determine where the enemy was, where they're moving to, and try to spot them first. 11th ACR, which is a unit that's stationed at Fort Irwin, they know the terrain. They're there 24/7. They know the terrain better than we do, so they always have that advantage. As a scout, that's your first chance to really hone your skills, your reconnaissance skills against the enemy that knows that terrain, that knows all the nooks and crannies of where that they can hide. So it was an interesting learning experience. Like as I said, this was the first time really getting to do cavalry type operations for me. So it was definitely a learning experience out there.
So where did you go next after NTC?
So we did an NTC rotation. Then we had to load everything back up, of course, to get back to Hawaii. By the time we got back to Hawaii, we had about a 60-day kind of grace period before we were getting ready to deploy at that point again. Because at that point, it's been almost 12 months. I think by the time we got back, it'd been 11 months that the unit's been back for. So we had about 60 days where people took block leave and started packing up things again to get ready to go on deployment. So after that 60 days, that's when we got our orders, our marching orders to go back to Iraq at the time and get ready for that.
What was your experience with this deployment? I mean, you've been on deployment a few times. Do you feel like every time you go, you are a better soldier because you already know it? Or is it a new place you're going to in that whatever AO you have to go to?
So my first deployment was in Baghdad. The second deployment, we went up to Balan, which was it's a lot less densely populated for us. So it was definitely a new experience, but you feel more prepared at this point because not everything you're going to be doing is brand new. Your very first deployment, everything is just so fast paced. Everything's coming at you a million miles per hour. I think the second deployment is really when you get the chance to kind of slow things down and realize this is why we do things the way we do it. The first deployment, you're keeping up and just trying to get through it. Your second deployment, at that point, you have all this experience. You had all this training. I'm getting ready for it. So I think it went smoother than my first deployment was. It wasn't as chaotic feeling to me. That I was able to really be able to make like better decisions throughout the deployment, I think.
And were you in a squad leader position at this point?
No, for this point, I was still a team
team
leader.
leader?
So I think for me, that was kind of like in an interesting way. These are things that I did that made me successful. These are things that your unit can do. So it's impactful on that portion, I think. A lot.
Mm-hmm. How did you like being at Fort Irwin with the OPFOR?
Fort Irwin being with the OPFOR is one of the funnest jobs for a short period of time. You get a chance to kind of work in a small group a lot of times because at the time you're playing insurgency-based enemies. So when I was doing that portion, you get to run around in a pickup truck and go attack convoys and stuff like that. So it's definitely kind of a fun experience. It's very unique to Fort Irwin. And again, you get to spend a lot of time out there with your troops. You'll be out in the field for 2 weeks out of every single month. So you really get to know the guys you're with. You get to know the terrain. You get to creative on how you operate as a bad guy at that point. So it is a fun assignment and when it comes to that aspects, I think.
What was it like living at Fort Irwin? A lot of people have different mixed opinions about different Army bases.
Yeah.
And you've been to a few of them already, whether that be Fort Cavazos or Fort... Was it called Schofield
Yeah, it's
Barracks?
called Schofield
That's what
Barracks.
it's called.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not like it's not a base at all?
No, so the base is called Schofield Barracks.
Okay.
And then you had like multiple bases like near that one in Hawaii.
Okay.
Like Wheeler Army Airfield next door.
Okay.
But Fort Irwin's unique. It's out in the middle of nowhere on the edge of the Mojave Desert. As far as training area, it's one of the biggest ones in the Army. I think if you took all the training area combined, it's like roughly the size of Connecticut. The actual living space, it is tiny. It's maybe 8-9 square city blocks at that point. It's not a lot on the base itself, but it's uniquely positioned halfway between LA and halfway between Las Vegas. So with you knowing your year-out schedule for Fort Irwin, with the units coming in to train, you could really plan a lot of free time down to go out to LA, go do everything in San Diego, go out to Vegas for a long weekend. So as far as that aspect goes, it's a great place to be if you want to go travel and see a lot of like Southwest, Southern California area. You just got to get used to longer drive times and stuff like that. I suggest if people get a chance, it's honestly an assignment worth having because it definitely gives you a different side of what the military is and what the training requirements are for units at that point.
Definitely. Okay. So how long did you spend there until you met to your next assignment?
So at that point, I was there for about 2.5 years, and that's when I decided to get out of the active duty Army at that point. At that point, like that was right when my parents are getting ready to retire here in New Mexico, and I wanted to be closer to family. At that point, I moved around a lot, so I thought about, I was like, I'll get out of the active duty Army and come back to New Mexico. And when I got back to New Mexico, I joined the Guard, the Army National Guard. For the sole fact, I still wanted to be connected to the military while kind of pursuing what was going to be next in my career. Once I got to the Guard, they offered me a unique opportunity to kind of come on full time and continue my military service, but with the ability to stay here locally and stay near my family, which was a pleasant surprise for me because I wasn't really planning on that. Because at that point, I didn't think I was going to stay in long term for the military. I thought my career was kind of done at that point, but this gave me a chance to kind of see it all the way through to my 20-year mark at that point, which is nice.
So you got the opportunity to be the liaison officer here immediately, or what was it
No.
like?
So when I first joined the Guard and got accepted to what they call the AGR program, Active Guard Reserve, I was originally assigned as a recruiter, which was an interesting job for me because normally I'm not one. I don't like to go out and talk to a lot of people. It's never really been my thing. But it was definitely a job that I ended up enjoying a lot more than I thought it was. It pushed me out of my comfort zone of what I normally was used to. And then getting a chance, honestly, to help people kind of find their journey throughout the military. Because just like me, I think a lot of the kids that I help get into the military were kids who didn't really think of the military as their first option. It's kind of interesting to see some of them nowadays. I've been doing this. A lot of them are now young NCOs. They're E5s, they're E6s now. So it's kind of cool to see their journey as they come up through and kind of follow them along in that path. So it's definitely a rewarding experience, but it's definitely a hard job. So I give recruiters who are still doing a lot of props just for how difficult the job can be. The amount of time and dedication it really takes to be good at it.
So you were basically recruiting for the National Guard,
Yeah.
just for the National Guard side of recruiting for, what would you call it? The enlisted side, basically?
Yeah, for the enlisted
Okay.
side for the National Guard. So I did that for about like 3.5 years before this opportunity came up. Normally in the past, UNM, Army ROTCs always had a National Guard liaison here. Historically in the past, it was always an officer, usually a captain. I think they've had a major here before. But when they brought it up to me as an opportunity to kind of come and do something different, being an instructor, I jumped at the opportunity. Because at that point, you didn't really have a lot of interaction on a day-to-day with soldiers as a recruiter. Yeah, you met recruits, you got people into the military, but I didn't interact a lot on a day-to-day basis with soldiers. So for me, this was a nice opportunity to come back and get into that kind of same role as being a mentor, giving advice, helping train people. So definitely as an opportunity goes, this was kind of a godsend for me to come here and be able to do that again.
Awesome.
The National Guard Liaison here is kind of a unique one. As far as ROTC programs, the split between soldiers going active duty and going National Guard within this program is close to a 50-50 split, which is kind of unique compared to most universities where it's not that way. I think with New Mexico being a smaller state, a lot of people do like to stay here. So I think that's why that 50-50 split between National Guard and active duty happens here. So it's kind of nice to be able to see these future officers for the Guard side come through this program and knowing that this is the largest commissioning source for the Army National Guard. I think on a yearly basis, we commission anywhere between 5 to about 9 people a year here into the Army National Guard. So it accounts for probably almost like 70% of the officers that go into the Guard come from UNM.
Wow.
Which is kind of interesting.
And then what types of units are even in New Mexico?
So New Mexico, I like to call it the big 3 here. The 3 biggest units are going to be your infantry unit, your transportation units, and your military police. So it's kind of the big 3. They're not limited to just those 3. There are other supporting units like engineers, aviation, medical. But those are definitely the biggest 3 career fields that kind of represent the state as a whole. New Mexico is on the smaller end of the Guard side, because as a population-wise, there's only like 2 million people in the whole state of New Mexico. I think right now the Guard sits at about 2,800 soldiers. So I think each and every officer that comes from UNM has such an impact on a smaller organization like that. Historically, in the past, all the adjutant generals, the 2-stars that's in charge from New Mexico, usually came from NIMI in the past, the New Mexico Military Institute. But seeing the amount of officers that UNM is putting in now, odds are in the near future, eventually one of the new adjutant generals will be from UNM, just based off the numbers, which is kind of a cool thing to think about in 10, 15 years, that maybe one of the students that I taught here is going to be the adjutant general of New Mexico. So that's kind of a cool thing to think about.
What other opportunities do you contribute to the program? So like not only you're the National Guard liaison, you help recruit for the National Guard, but what else do you help out with around here?
So I've had a couple of different roles here. Originally, it was just as a liaison, kind of coordinating between the Guard side and the support they offer to the program. And I slowly moved into the instructor role and helping with recruiting. And this past year, I served as the Senior Military Science Instructor, which is the senior enlisted to the program. And that's been honestly an enjoyable experience for me, to be able to provide that guidance and mentorship to the new cadets, along with also the cadre here. Be able to provide them the enlisted aspect and the kind of advice I can here. So it's definitely been an interesting ride here as far as jobs go.
And so you said you're an instructor or got that opportunity, but what courses do you instruct?
So I taught the military science one course, which is the freshman course. It's their first introduction into what the Army is and what Army leadership is. And that's always interesting because these are normally kids who have no military experience. So they're kind of a blank slate. And for us, I think the freshman year is one of the most important years because it really determines, the instructor determines if they're going to stay in the program or not at that point. If that first year instructor isn't someone who can engage with them, keep them interested, get them excited about what the Army is, those retention rates really drop. And we've seen it in the past with some of the past ones where you start off with a really big class and fewer would really move on to the next level. So when I got the chance to be that MS1 instructor, it was really important for me to get the kids bought in and felt like they were part of this team. That way they would want to continue to and progress on throughout the program. I think for the most part, we've had a decent success with that from year to year. I think last year's freshman class was the biggest we've had in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And the amount that we were able to retain going from year one now into year two was a bigger jump than we've had in the past, which is always nice to see.
Definitely. What sort of things are the students learning in the very beginning course?
So in the very beginning course, we want to teach them the Army basics. We just want to introduce them to how the Army is organized and how we operate on a day-to-day basis. So for a lot of the kids, we do physical training. This is their first chance at really doing like an honest-to-God organized physical training exercise on a routine basis. And the second big portion is just kind of getting them really bought into the idea of service at that point. We're trying to get them to volunteer for things inside the program to get that buy-in, say, hey, this is something that I want to be a part of. And this year we tried something a little bit different. We also added life skills there. Being a young 18-year-old, this is most of their first times away from their family. We wanted to set them up for success. We had financial advisors come in and explain to them the long-term planning, because it's never too early to start thinking about how do I budget out my money? How do I budget out for retirement? How do I set myself up for that success? We had people come in for mental health counseling to give them that kind of basis of how do I deal through adversity? How do I work through this? So it's definitely kind of nice to see them get something besides just the military side. That way they know it's more than just military 24/7. That we still have an obligation to ourselves and to our families to really be productive members of society. And I think those extra classes kind of helped kind of set up that base for them. And those classes honestly only make them eventually better leaders within the Army. I believe so, at least.
That's awesome. Well, for a lot of students, like you said, it was 50-50. Is there anything UNM? Let's talk about that. So what is UNM? I mean, you've been here for a few years now. And we operate in a brigade, and there's lots of different schools. And in New Mexico, there's another two. You mentioned NIMI, and then New Mexico State is to the south. But what does UNM bring to the table that's, at least our program is different or competitive?
So I think for us, with the PMS, he had an idea of doing a cadet-led program that makes us a little bit different. Seniors get a chance to really get their first experience as a platoon leader and plan the day-to-day activities of the program. Us here as cadre, we're here to kind of give them their left and right limits and give them guidance and give them as much advice as possible. But it was really on the cadets here to manage how the training went, to organize that training, to get to the end result of what we expected of them. And I think that's kind of unique when it comes to programs. Not every ROTC runs that way, because that freedom for each program to kind of run different and see fit depending on their cadre at the time. I think for us, switching over to that cadet-driven program is such a unique thing in our area that has attracted a lot of cadets, because our cadets go out there and do the recruiting. Our cadets are those ambassadors to the university. I think that's why we've seen such a big growth here at UNM compared to like New Mexico State and NIMI, whose numbers are kind of drawing down a little bit. I think the new approach has really empowered the cadets to be more proactive, to become better leaders. So I think that's the kind of uniqueness that UNM kind of brought to the table with ROTC. What's
been the most rewarding thing here as far as being an instructor and a part of the cadre?
For me, the most rewarding thing being, I'm probably now the most senior tenured cadre here, being here the longest, and Sergeant Doers left. I think for me is getting to see this first class I started off with as freshmen commission now. This last commission class was 14 people. And seeing all 14 of them go from awkward 18-year-old kids setting foot on campus to now 22-year-old, 23-year-old lieutenants, and just the amount of growth they've done in that short amount of time has just been probably the most rewarding thing for me to see. Because I remember when they first got here, just the look of kind of like confusion and fear on their face, trying to not only be good college students, but kind of get into that military lifestyle, to now, as those graduating seniors, they are running the whole program on a day-to-day basis, just seeing the leaps and bounds between planning, between training, and everything else that they made. It was just an amazing kind of experience to watch over 4 years. And then you don't realize how far they really do come until you get a chance at the end when they graduate to really reflect back on where they started to where they are now. You see that big change.
Is there any advice you would give to our new lieutenants, or even the new students who are coming here this semester?
I think my biggest advice for new lieutenants is develop your non-commissioned officers. Being an NCO in ROTC is a little different than the officers here. I think the officers really focus on the what and why of how the Army operates. As a non-commissioned officer, I'm more focused on how the Army operates on a platoon and soldier-based level. So I think for me, for those new lieutenants, I normally tell them the same advice. If you develop your non-commissioned officers, if you help train them, help get them to a level of proficiency, it only makes everyone else's life that much better. They'll help you succeed as a young lieutenant in your mission, and they'll help those young soldiers succeed in their mission, which is the execution portion. If they can form that relationship with their non-commissioned officers, develop them, train them, lead them, I think a lot of officers will be set up for future success, because the NCO officer relationship doesn't end at the platoon leader spot. It only gets more intense as they go up. As they get to company commanders, their right-hand person is always their first sergeant. Battalion commanders have their sergeant majors. There's always an enlisted person that's going to be along for their career to help provide that guidance and mentorship for them. So I think that's the most important advice I can give them as they go forward into their careers.
All right. Well, Sergeant Stanger, it's awesome having you on.
Thank you for having me.
Much appreciated. And yeah, we'll call it at that.
All right. Thank you.
Me off to war. I want a good steed under me like my forefathers before. I want a good night when the bugle sounds and I hear the cannons roar. Well, I want to be in the cavalry if they send me off to war. Well, I want a horse and a volunteer force that's riding forth at